you open the school, and then 5 and 6 are what tends to happen when the school actually opens. So in terms of 3 and 4, 3, when I say community, I also put in there recruitment, so the people that you can hire from and the students that you can get in, and time, which is that because you've got a very limited time window in which to open your school, some decisions just get left to one side and people think to themselves, well, we'll sort it out later. And I'll give some examples of where that's really come back to bite in the past. Also, when you open your school, you will typically have a core group who are the people who led it. If they struggle in that first year, or if you have problems with leadership and the people who've wanted to open the school and there's a conflict, that becomes really quite problematic. And again, I'll give you some examples of how that's played out. Power and authority is kind of similar, but it's to do with leadership, and I think probably was less important as we went forward. If I was writing it again, I'd put those two together. Yeah, I'll go on to the examples to explain them a bit more. So, the big failures. The first one which really hit the headlines was Al Medina School last year in Derby, and one of the reasons I think this became such a big one was because this is it just doesn't look good if you get inadequate and there's 4s all down a page. Most of us could imagine if we got our Ofsted inspections back and saw that, we'd be pretty gutted and feel like it had gone quite wrong. What's interesting about Al Medina is if you go back and read the pre-inspection reports, so before the school actually opens, there is a check on the school. And if you check Al Medina, it raises things like fire exits haven't been properly looked for. There was no trained medical staff. There are issues around safeguarding and concerns about the staff training. Now, those are tiny, right? I can imagine if I'm opening the school, I'm focused on uniform and getting parents in, I want to think about curriculum, I'm going to order exercise books. I might just not think to myself about fire exits. I'm pretty certain that no one thought to themselves, I know what we're really scared of school. I think we'll just sit around and hope that people, burn in fires. I'm sure that wasn't how anyone was thinking whatsoever. But it's a good example of if you're very constrained on time, which some of these schools in the first few cohorts were, you can end up just thinking, you know what, we'll sort the fire exits out later. And every time you boot one of those decisions forward, you end up with this great big lag. And that's how we've ended up with, and there are people who'll tell these stories about their own schools with a lot more humour, about how they got to their first day and realised they hadn't organised lunch or hadn't organised bin collections. So they suddenly got to the end of the day and realised they had rubbish and thought, they haven't liaised with the council, right. And so those kinds of things are problematic. You're always going to have some of those mistakes. What's interesting with Al Medina is those were flagged up, and then some of those subsequently, even a year later, still weren't really being resolved, for example, the safeguarding issues. It also comes back a little bit to recruitment. So if what you're doing is you're going to take in lots of members of staff who are quite inexperienced, which again is something that the school did, they are going to have big gaps in knowledge. So safeguarding, for example, is quite a specific skill. It's not something that even if you're fantastic, you're a brilliant music teacher and you've taught all kinds of orchestras, that's fine, but you won't necessarily know what the specific safeguarding issues are. I think that's the range. On the upside, I used to teach in a classroom with a plastic roof, so it used to be about 50 times louder than that, so I'm certain I can yell above it. So with Al Medina, you have this issue. If you're going to take in staff, if they're quite inexperienced, you need to be very, very aware of that. And that's difficult if what you're doing is spending all of your time, as people have, defending the use of inexperienced staff. No, they're great. No, they're wonderful. So you start to think to yourself about all the wonderful things that they're going to do, and you forget that there are some things that maybe they need sorting out with. So I think Al Medina taught people lots and lots of things, but for me the main one is those tiny little issues that haven't always been looked at and are really significant to do with time. If you can, and you're going to open a school, the longer period of time you have, the better you are to be prepared. And I think that the changes in the policy over time have meant that people now have, hopefully, more time before they're making those decisions. It now sounds very much like my classroom. I couldn't get a picture of it earlier. King's Science Academy is a very interesting one. This is the one which isn't inadequate. But a lot of people seem to think that it's been a failure because there are issues around finances and because, like many free schools, the leadership has changed. So lots and lots of free schools have found that in the first year, first 18 months, the head teacher has changed for various different reasons. And that does cause, as any of you who've been in a school where you've had a major change in leadership will know, that does cause quite a lot of problems. Again, what you have here is an inexperienced person taking over. So you have someone who hadn't necessarily led this kind of project before, hadn't necessarily had lots of leadership time in school, and so you can end up with a situation where people are trying to do lots of things, the finances in particular, that maybe isn't their main area of skill. And without the right people on the team to do these things, you can get yourself into quite a lot of trouble. And that then links back through to the teaching and learning. Because if you're spending all of your time trying to cover up problems to do with what was happening with the finances, you're not able to spend your time being in front of your staff, leading on vision, working on learning and teaching. And so that, I think, is a big part of what's gone wrong with certain free schools. The other ones, the big sort of spectacular ones, are Discovery, which was closing. I can't remember if it's actually closed in April. It has closed now, yeah. And IES Breckland, with Mr. Hancock looking very smart outside. What's useful about Discovery and IES Breckland is they're both parent-led. So we have this idea of, is it very good to have parents involved? They should be coming from the community. Discovery New Schools was led by a couple originally. IES Breckland was a middle school which was going to close down and then was reopened in that building as a new school. Big difference, which was that Breckland decided to contract in a private company to help run the school day to day. And that sounds pretty good, right? If you're a set of parents and you know that you don't have the skills and you've got someone like me saying you don't have the financial skills, so you need to get some help, you think to yourself, brilliant, well, we'll get somebody in who does have all of these skills. The question has arisen, really, is whether or not you have the skills to manage the contract with the people that you're getting in. And that was one of the things that I think really came out of my work with the trains and the rails franchising. It's still a thing I wax lyrical about. If you like trains, come and talk to me about them. Which is that if the government is going to contract out trains, that can work really well. But you've got to know what you want from your train operators. You've got to be very clear about it. You've got to make them very accountable. And the things that you make them accountable for have got to make sense.